there lived a husband and wife. For a long time they already wanted to have a child, but he was not there.
Oh.
One day, my wife fell ill. The husband asked her what she wants the most. The wife replied that there was a magnificent garden nearby, where many of the most beautiful flowers grow. There is a beautiful Rapunzel in the garden. It looked so fresh and so green that she really wanted to taste it. But the garden was surrounded by a high fence, and no one dared to enter it, since this garden belonged to one witch. She possessed great power, and everyone in the world feared her. The husband loved his wife very much, and decided to get a Rapunzel for her, no matter what it cost him. And so at dusk he climbed over the stone fence into the sorceress's garden, in a hurry picked up a whole handful of green Rapunzel, and brought it to his wife. She immediately made herself a salad from it, and ate greedily. She liked this salad so much that the next day she wanted even more than before. The husband made his way into the garden again, but the witch was already standing in front of him. She glared at him angrily and said that he would pay a lot for stealing the Rapunzel. He asked the witch not to be angry, because he tore off the Rapunzel for his wife, who was very ill. And he loves her so much.
Okay.
The witch's anger passed a little, and she said that if it was true, she would allow him to collect as much Rapunzel as he wanted, but on one condition. He will have to give the witch the child who will be born to his wife. The husband agreed with fear. When the wife gave birth to a daughter, the witch immediately appeared, took the child with her, and named her Rapunzel. Rapunzel became the most beautiful girl in the world. When she was 12 years old, the witch locked her in a tower. That tower was in the forest, and it had no doors or stairs. Only at the very top was a small window. When the witch wanted to climb the tower, she called Rapunzel to pull her sides down. And Rapunzel had long, beautiful hair. She hears the voice of the witch, loosens her braids, ties them up to the window hook, and the hair falls down, and the witch then climbs up, clinging to them.
Hello.
Several years passed, and the king's son happened to ride a horse through the forest where the tower stood. Suddenly he heard singing, and it was so pleasant that he stopped and began to listen. Rapunzel sang it in her wonderful voice. The prince wanted to climb up. He began to look for the entrance to the tower, but it was impossible to find him. He once saw how the witch climbs up the braids that Rapunzel lowered her. And the next day, when it was already getting dark, the prince drove up to the tower and called Rapunzel. She heard, pulled her braids down, and the prince climbed up. Rapunzel, seeing that a man she had never seen came to her, was very frightened at first. But the prince spoke to her affectionately, and said that his heart was so touched by the singing that he decided to see her without fail. Then Rapunzel ceased to be afraid, and when he asked if she agreed to marry him, she gave her consent and held out her hand to him. But they just did not know how to go down together. They figured out that when the prince came, he would always take a piece of silk with him, and Rapunzel would weave a ladder out of it. And when the ladder is ready, they will go down it together and leave. The sorceress did not notice anything until one day Rapunzel asked why it is easier to drag the prince up. The sorceress understood everything, got angry and clutched in rage at Rapunzel's beautiful hair. I wrapped them around my left arm several times, and with my right grabbed the scissors and cut them off. She took the sorceress into the dense thicket of Rapunzel and hid her there. She tied the severed braids to the window hook, and when the prince appeared, she pulled them down. The prince climbed up and saw the witch. She looked at him with her malicious look and said that he would never see Rapunzel. The king's son was beside himself with grief and jumped out of the tower in despair, but the thorny thorns of the bushes, on which he fell, gouged out his eyes. The blind prince wandered for several years in grief and sorrow through the forest, all the time grieving and crying for his beloved lost. Once he went into a dense thicket. Suddenly the prince heard someone singing. It seemed so familiar to him, and he went to meet him. When he came closer, Rapunzel recognized him, threw herself on his neck and cried bitterly with joy. 2 tears fell in his eyes, and the prince regained his sight and began to see as before. He brought her to his kingdom, and they lived for many, many years in happiness and joy.
Once upon a time there was a little girl. Her name was Heidi. Heidi's parents died and she was cared for by Aunt Deet. But one day she had to take the girl to her grandfather. He was not very talkative, as he lived in a small house in the mountains. Auntie found a job in another city, so she had to leave the girl with her grandfather for a while. The grandfather of the Alps is used to living alone far from people. Therefore, he was very happy with his granddaughter, but did not know how to show it. The old man arranged for her a small room in the attic. Heidi fell in love with her grandfather at first sight. A wonderful life in the mountains began for her. The day after arrival, Heidi met her grandfather's huge dog. She spent all her free time with him. One day, while walking the dog in the hills, she met the shepherd Peter, who was tending sheep in the meadow. The children became friends, and Peter began to take Heidi with him for walks in the mountains. Gambling all day, Heidi felt really happy. At the same time, she never forgot about her grandfather, and in everything she helped him around the house. One of her favorite things was to bake bread. Heidi brought it to Peter's mom, and she, in turn, gave the girl fresh goat milk. Summer is over and winter has come. Peter started going to school. But Heidi was still too young for school. Therefore, Aunt Deet returned for her to take the girl to the city and teach her at home after work. The grandfather of the Alps was very upset, but still let the granddaughter go so that she could learn to read and write. Heidi was also very upset, but her aunt promised to return her to the mountains soon. Arriving in the city, the aunt took the girl to a large beautiful house. There Heidi met the girl Clara. She could not walk and moved in a chair due to an accident that she experienced in early childhood. Auntie brought Heidi to this house to keep Clara company because she had no friends. The girls got along well and became real friends. Clara helped Heidi learn to read and write. Having got used to the new place, the girl began to feel freer. Clara also became very attached to her. But Heidi really missed the mountains and her grandfather. She had everything one could dream of, but she felt like she was in a golden cage. She even stopped eating. Aunt Deet immediately understood why her niece was sad. And I decided to send her back to her grandfather. Clara was very upset that Heidi had to leave. But the aunt promised that Clara would be able to come and visit Heidi next year. A year later, Clara came to Heidi's. She met Peter and the children became very good friends. They walked a lot in the mountains, breathed fresh air, and ate natural food. But after some time, Peter began to worry that Heidi would again leave with Clara in the city. And then one day he threw Clara's wheelchair off a cliff. He thought that this would solve all the problems. But it turned out that without a wheelchair and thanks to the fresh mountain air, Clara became much stronger. And after a while she was able to walk at all. Aunt Deet could not believe her eyes. And Peter felt very ashamed of his act. He admitted that he had thrown Clara's wheelchair off the cliff. Of course the girls forgave him. and the happy friendship of the children has been preserved for life.